Hello, this is Daryl Ehrlich, and this is the Vietnam Voices series, a project by the Billings Gazette, sponsored by Master Lube. And today it is October 28th, 2015, and I have in studio with me today Doug Braun. Doug, thanks so much for being here. Doug served in the U.S. Navy from 1965 to 1993. That's all the thunder I'm going to steal. We're going to let Doug do the talking from here on out. But let's start. Doug, thanks for being here, and let's start by the beginning. Let's back up a little before 1965, right? 1965.
Correct.
Where were you before? What were you doing before 1965?
Well, actually, Daryl, first of all, I want to thank the Gazette for this wonderful series that they're doing, because the Vietnam veterans, we were kind of looked down upon, and it was a period of time where two of our great tough guys, Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali and Sylvester Stallone, ran to Canada. They didn't stay here and protect our country. So I am especially proud that I had the chance to serve in our country. I was a Navy reservist, which means I had 2 years active duty on my first hitch. I was away just like being in the regular service for 2 years, and then 4 years reserve time. And then I kept drilling the rest of the time. I had a total of almost 28 years total. And I was born in Terry, Montana, real poor. My dad was a U.S. World War II U.S. Navy Seabee. And the Seabees are the construction people of the Navy. It's kind of like the Air Force Red Horse Squadron. The Seabees build roads, and they always carry weapons with them in case they have to fight. They build roads, runways, buildings, all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah. And so I was born in Terry, Montana, and my dad just bounced. We bounced all over the place. He could never stay in one place. So we left Terry when I was a little baby, moved to Miles City, stayed there through the 5th grade, moved to Yuma, Arizona for 2 years, then came back, and we were in Laurel for about 2 years. And then we finally settled in Columbus, where I graduated from high school. And my father wanted to go to Alaska, and we said no. Of course, by this time I'm a little older. I'm in high school,
right?
And we said no, we're not going to go to Alaska. But so we bounced, and I never had a chance to really make any lifelong friends. I've got lifelong friends, but I mean from grade school, I guess I'm referring to. So we had, when I grew up, we had a lot of time, absolutely no money, and lots of old cars. Lots of old cars. And my father always said, he was kind of a BSer, and he always said, someday I'm going to build an old car museum. Well, that never happened. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I bought this old warehouse lumber yard in Terry, Montana, which is east of here 180 miles, right on I-94. And so I started an auto museum in his honor called Archie's Antique Auto Museum. And then the Bakken boom hit, and I got a lot of valuable stuff down there. So it's more or less a private museum, and I don't advertise because Terry's a sleepy little town, and I could get a bunch of stuff stolen, so I don't really advertise. But my goal is to build a huge museum for my antique cars, probably in Columbus, Montana, just west of here, 40 miles.
Right. So let's go back to 65. Why did you join? Because your father had joined, or why did you join the Navy? Or tell me about that.
Well, Daryl, the reason I joined is my parents, even though we were poor, always wanted me to go to college. And at that time, it was Eastern Montana College. Now it's MSUB, Billings. But so we didn't have any money, so I fibbed to the school and said I wanted to live off campus. My uncle lived in town here, but we weren't real close, and he was kind of a strange guy, and I stayed with them for a little bit, and then I just got this cold feeling like you're not really welcome here. So I took and I rented an apartment down at 701 Wyoming, and I had my sister live. Well, she lived with me while she was going to Eastern too. And the reason I joined the reserves is I had a buddy, still have a buddy, who's got Lou Gehrig's disease now, who was in the reserves. His name is Jack Snediger. And he was my buddy, and he said, "Hey, Braun," he said, he said, "you ought to join the reserves." He said, "We get $63 a month." And I thought, wow, that's cool, because I worked every night on the corner at a gas station. I think it's now a travel agency. It's on the corner of 30th and 1st Avenue North. And I worked 5 hours a night cleaning the place. I sold gas, of course, and then I closed up, and I had to clean the place. I had to scrub it with this guy that owned it wanted me to use Comet Cleanser and take and spray the floor down with hot water, and where it was greasy, put Comet cleanser on there and scrub it with a broom, a brush. So I thought, wow, $63, because my apartment, I really lucked out. It's a nice little 2-bedroom basement apartment, all utilities furnished, only $80 a month. I thought, wow, that'll make up the bulk of my apartment. And at that time, I was making $1.75 an hour, and I went to ask my boss, his name was Jim Day, for a raise, and he says, I can get men as good as you for the same price. So that really that threw me backwards. That throws your ego all over the floor. But
right.
So anyway, when I joined Pearl Harbor Day. That's the day that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. So I joined Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1965. And I've always been proud of that. Then I got into an officers program in college called a Reserve Officers Candidate School, a Reserve Officers Candidate Program. It's similar to the ROTC they have up in Bozeman in Missoula. And so I kind of messed that up, because all you had to have was a 2-point. But with my working every night from 5 till 10, I just didn't study much, and I don't like to study anyway. and I had a chemistry course that I took, and I should have dropped. But oh no, I'm going to bowl my way through this thing. And how ignorant I was at the time, I thought chemistry was doing experiments.
Right.
Well, it's not. It's all math. And so I took what they call a bonehead or remedial math course at Eastern. Instead of just dropping the program, oh no, I'm gonna get through this. Well, anyway, my grade point dropped down to a 1.5. And I got a letter from the Department of the Navy in the spring of 1967. I should back up first. I already went to, because I was in this officers program, I went to boot camp in 1966.
Okay.
Spring of 66. And then I had to go aboard a ship for 2 weeks. And so then I goofed up and flunked this chemistry course, and I got a letter almost to the day from the Department of the Navy. Dear Mr. Braun, we regret to inform you that you are going on active duty because of your low grade point average. You are going on active duty as an enlisted man.
Wow.
And of course, Vietnam was hot. Everything, it was just crazy, and they were taking almost anybody. But I was already in the service, and didn't bother me. I'm a big boy. I signed on the dotted line, and so I actually got some schooling on my 2 years active duty. I wanted to be an electrician, so I went to electrician school in San Diego, and it was good training, excellent training. Let's see, I can't remember the timeline. I think that started in the fall of '67, and then I graduated from electrician's mate, Class A school in San Diego, just after the first of 1968. I think it was in January '68. Then at that time, they had old 16 millimeter for movies. They had on the ships for entertainment back then. There were no computers or anything like that.
Right. But
they had movies, and they had a motion picture operator school I went to. Was short. It was just a short 2 or 3 week class. It just showed you basically how to run, and the projectors, clean them, show the movies, and all that stuff. And when you think back, wow, how advanced things are nowadays,
yeah,
and they're going to become in the future. So I went to the MPO school, and then the military has you sign. They call it a dream sheet, and what it is it's kind of a request of active duty, where you want to go on your active duty. So I put destroyer escort, which is a small ship based in San Diego, is my first choice, and I can't remember what the second and third choices were. But anyway, it came back. I got the USS Enterprise, and it was currently over off the coast of Vietnam.
Right.
And you think, wow, it's not what I really wanted. However, it's the way it is.
Yeah. So so after you got that, so this is in '68, you got that notice that you're going to basically off the coast of Vietnam. The Enterprise, was that a scary assignment? Was that something? What did you think when you got that?
Well, I thought, wow, and as a young man, you're concerned about, am I going to get killed, and you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And being basically an uneducated person, you just don't know. But I signed the dotted line, and I want to serve for my country, so that's just the way she is.
Yep.
So the Enterprise actually was the Rolls-Royce of ships. The Enterprise was the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. It had 8 nuclear reactors, and I was so proud that I got to go aboard the Enterprise. It was just ecstatic. I was just ecstatic. And so anyway, the Enterprise happened to be off the coast of Korea, because the Koreans captured our spy ship, the USS Pueblo, back in early '68. And so the Enterprise was up floating off the coast of Korea waiting for orders. So how the Navy does things, or the military do things, it's kind of hurry up and wait. So after I graduated in San Diego, I think I got a little short 2-week leave, and then let's see. I didn't get the leave then, because I took my leave during school. We had a little break at Christmas time. So so after graduation from electrician's mate, Class A school, and motion picture operator school, I got my orders to the Enterprise. So they flew us from San Diego up by San Francisco, between San Francisco and Sacramento, to Travis Air Force Base. And we were in transit there several days. And it was just all overwhelming as a young man. It was overwhelming to me. So anyway, they put us on this commercial aircraft, and I can remember this kind of a depressing thought that flashes back through my mind. We they had commercial airliners fly into Travis, and there were 200 military people on this plane, and the bulk of them were Army and Marine, and there were 6 of us Seabees, or sailors, in the back of the aircraft, and I can remember looking down the aisles and seeing all our young guys, and I figured being on a ship like the Enterprise, I'd probably be pretty safe. I mean, if that blew up, it'd be something else. But so I figured I'd probably be safe, even though we were over right off the coast of Vietnam, sending in our aircraft for airstrikes. But it was depressing just to look down the rows, and I wondered how many of our young guys are going to come back.
Yeah.
So I can remember we left Travis and we flew nonstop to Wake Island. And I can remember we pulled in there. That was our first stop. And there's the big map on the wall. And of course, it was about 3 in the morning, pitch black. But so we went in the terminal to use, with a little small terminal to use the bathroom. And it's a big picture, a big map on the wall of the world. And of course, Wake Island is out in the middle of the ocean. And there's a little red light that said, "You are here." And then we, of course, got back on the aircraft, and then we flew to Clark's Air Force Base in the Philippines, where I was in transit again. And then the rest of the guys, they flew on to Vietnam. Then from Clark's Air Force Base, they put me in, I flew to Atsugi Naval Air Station in Japan. And I was in transit there, waiting for my trip aboard the Enterprise. And I was probably in transit there about 3 days, waiting for a mail plane. They have on our big our carriers, they have a small aircraft called a COD, C-O-D, and what that stands for, I don't know. But it holds about 8 to 10 passengers plus bags of mail. And I can remember this guy's loading the COD and taking off at Atsugi, heading for Korea. And it wasn't, from what I can remember, it wasn't a very long flight, 2-3 hours. And then I can remember the pilot saying, "Okay, bend over and grab, we're approaching the Enterprise. Bend over and grab that rail at the bottom of your seat." And we were facing towards the rear of the little airplane. And all of a sudden, he says, "Okay." And next thing you know, that our tail hook grabbed the arresting gear cable, and we were going probably 150 miles an hour to 0 in probably 200 feet. And that arresting gear cable is like a cable attached to a big shock absorber. It pulled it out, and then it retracted. And there I was on the Enterprise.
That's a heck of a landing.
Oh boy, what an experience.
Yeah. So what was your first impression of the Enterprise?
Well, I was just in awe. It was just huge ship. And you're out in the middle of then I should back up. We floated around for about a week, waiting for orders from Washington to do something, and of course they never came. So we had to go back down to our station right off the coast of Vietnam in Tonkin Gulf. They called it Yankee Station in Tonkin Gulf, which is just right off the coast, when we were up off Korea, it was cold. I can remember it was cold and dismal looking, overcast. And then when we got down off the coast of Vietnam, it was hot and humid.
Yeah, so it had changed a lot.
It did in just a matter of a few days.
Could you see, were you stationed far enough off the coast where you could you see anything into Vietnam, or were you way out how far were you out at sea?
I don't know how many miles, because they say the horizon is only 20 miles, so I don't know. But I know you could see bomb flashes.
Okay.
So I'm guessing probably 15 to 20 miles off the coast of Vietnam. And the captain would come on the PA system every morning. Well, yesterday we blew up so many truck convoys and bridges, and kind of give us a report on what happened. And I can remember then I was what they call non-rated. I was E3. And even though I graduated from electrician's mate Class A school, I hadn't. And when you become an E4, then you become a rated man. So I took the test, and I made E4, which is a third class petty officer, or an electrician's mate, as a full-blown electrician.
Right.
And I got to go into the shop that specialized. All we did is work on aircraft elevator and the smaller elevator circuitry, just electrical circuits. And as well, the other electricians mates, they did work on different electrical circuits throughout the ship. So we were kind of in an elite shop of our own. And then I can remember when I first got aboard the Enterprise, because I was non-rated, I had to mess cook. And the ships in the Navy, the cops, or they call them the master at arms. And though I can remember they put all of us mess cooks sleeping together, and so they could come down and wake us up and get us going to prepare the meals. And I can remember it was horrible. There must have been probably at least 100 mess cooks sleeping in this compartment area. And I can remember the master at arms, they're kind of sick people. They'd come in with the old stainless steel pans and spoons, and they'd say, "Reveille, reveille, it's time to get up."
Wow. And that's how you got up?
That's how they got us up at 4 in the morning. And I'll tell you, and of course you just kind of, for me, I wake up kind of slow. I don't wake up like right now.
Right.
And so then I took the test, of course, and I made third class petty officer. And then I went into the catapult and elevator electrical repair shop, and that was pretty cool. And I can remember going up. Our shop was right below the flight deck, and I can remember going up to what they called a superstructure on to where the captain, they could see all the way around it on the superstructure. It rose approximately 70 or 80 foot higher than the flight deck, and we used to go up there and watch the flights take off, the launches into Vietnam. And the most popular fighter plane we had then was the F-4 Phantoms. They were a 2-seat airplane, super fast, and beautiful aircraft. And they would load them with bombs to go into Vietnam and blow up the different things they wanted to blow up, truck convoys, bridges, etc. Provide firepower to the ground troops. Before I got into the catapult and elevator shop, I was still non-rated, as what they call non-rated, so we had to go on bomb working parties. And before I went in the Navy, I never drank coffee. And we worked 12 hours on and 12 hours out, 12 hours off. And what they do, they would have ammo ships come alongside the Enterprise, and they would, what they call high line, they'd shoot a line across, and they'd pull a heavier line, and then a heavy cable, and the ammo ships would send pallets of bombs over to us. And then our job was to uncrate them, and they had little carts that you could pick these bombs up with. They were heavy. and just kind of a two-wheel cart, and then you stored them down below in the hold of the ship, probably below the water line. And we had nuclear weapons on, of course that was all classified, nobody was supposed to know that.
Right.
But they had nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs aboard the Enterprise. And we had a small detachment of Marines who, that was their job, is to guard the elevators. We had probably, from what I can remember, they had two main elevators that went down to where the bombs were stored. And you had to have different, you had to have a secret clearance to be down in there. And of course they give you that. When you're on active duty, they give you the clearances you need and stuff. And then occasionally we had bad boys aboard the ship, and the Marines, they would bring them to chow and march them to chow. And I can remember if you got thrown in the brig on the ship, it was there weren't too many people. Vaguely I remember at one time there might have been a dozen prisoners and guys that did whatever, and they'd take them down and cut their hair completely off and shave them bald. And then they had then the Marines were in charge of them, and they kept them in jail on the ship. And so then I can remember we were over off the coast of Vietnam from the middle of February till, it sticks in my mind, around the 1st of July, 1968. And then we were scheduled to go into the yards up in Bremerton, Washington, into dry dock they had some repairs they wanted to do. So we took, and we were just ecstatic, just so anxious to get back to the United States. We didn't have any fresh milk, and the eggs they'd get from Japan, and I can remember the yolks were literally a light green, the egg yolks. And so when we heard we were going back to our home port, which was San Francisco, or Alameda, is where and since then now they've closed that down, but that was our home port then, going under the Golden Gate Bridge and over into Alameda. And so I can remember getting off the ship first of all, when we had a burial at sea, and before they'd let us, we were just anchored off the coast, San Francisco, a short ways. How far, I don't know. But we were anchored there for about a day, and they flew this serviceman's body aboard the ship, and we had literally a burial at sea. And I can remember it was we were all anxious to get into port, because we wanted to get some real food and drink a fresh glass of milk, and we were out there for about a day. It's kind of weird. They had on the edge of the flight deck, they had a little rack built where the coffin fit in this little rack, and it was pointed downwards toward the ocean, and it was a murky day. It was overcast, and the waters were pretty choppy, except the Enterprise was so big, you really couldn't tell. There was just a slight movement in rough water. And I can remember they had the ceremony for the veteran, and then they just dumped him overboard.
Right.
Yeah, and away he went.
So was he an older veteran? Did you know anything about him, or did?
I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't remember.
That must have been a little eerie. I mean, just stopping and doing that.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
And you wanted to get home.
We wanted to get back on American soil.
Yeah. What's a day like when you were over there and there are planes flying sorties and things like that? When you moved up to a petty officer and you were in the electrician, what's an average day like? What were you doing on board? What was that like?
Well, what we did is we worked on the circuits for the catapults and elevators, and so you have chow. I think it was about 7 o'clock, 6. I think it was 6 o'clock every morning. We had chow, and then we went up to our shop, and then they would tell us what we had to do for the day. And I can remember they had certain guys assigned to the captain's elevator. He had his own little personal elevator.
Wow.
And that was what they call good duty when you assigned to that. And then the ship had 4 huge aircraft elevators, which could move, I think, about 2 F-4 Phantoms from the hangar deck area. They'd move them over with little carts onto the elevators and raise them about, I think it was about 70 foot in the air to the flight deck where they would launch them. And those elevators were fast. It didn't take long from the time they put them on the aircraft elevator till they reached the flight deck, probably about 5 seconds.
Wow.
I mean, they were fast. They moved real fast. And let's see, I was trying to remember something else I was going to say. But I can remember at that time, you had to have your hair cut real short. And I didn't like my hair cut real short. Nowadays, it's popular to have your hair almost to be shaved bald, but then it wasn't. It wasn't cool. And I can remember we had the captain, never met him personally, but the executive officer, he was ornery. And I can remember one night I had to stand watch, and it was over by the captain's elevator. And I can remember just kind of peeking into his stateroom. It was probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and just kind of watching him, because there was kind of a crack in the window where you could see him. And I thought, ornery guy. But that's just the way it goes. There was a man, an Army general named General Westmoreland, who commanded the troops in Vietnam. And when he left Vietnam, they flew him aboard the Enterprise, and of course flew him off the Enterprise. To where, I don't know, back to the States. But I can remember we had a little ceremony on the flight deck, and I was about as close as you and I are from him, probably 6 feet from him, and I thought, wow, this real popular man, real popular man.
Wow.
And then we'd, what I was going to say too is what we would do is for R&R and replenishment of food supplies, we would pull into Seabee Bay in the Philippines for probably a week, about every 30 days, because we had to take on food supplies. And from what I can remember, we didn't really take on ammunition then, but food supplies. And I can remember the Philippine people were extremely poor. And we had these huge garbage cans on the ship. They were heavy galvanized cans, and I can remember the Filipinos coming on the ship and hauling our garbage cans off. And we had a bakery on the ship, and they made really good donuts and pretty strong coffee. So that's what got, when I was working on the bomb working parties, we drank a lot of coffee and ate a lot of donuts. But I can remember the extra donuts, when we were out to sea, they just threw them into the ocean. through the food, as well as any garbage. Nowadays they don't do that, but then they would just throw any the bomb packing crates, anything, just throw it over the side. And I heard stories of my dad saying during World War II they would do that, as well as if they had excess vehicles like Jeeps, they would just throw them off into the ocean. But things are different now. But I can remember, getting back to my story, I can remember the Filipinos carrying these huge garbage cans full of garbage off the ship. And on this one time, I noticed this one guy, they must have dumped a pan of day-old donuts right on the top of the garbage can, and he was just eating donuts as they were hauling them off the ship.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you, when you were doing that, your job was to make sure all the elevators worked.
That's
and if they didn't, was it hard to repair something like that, or were you well trained?
Well, we were well trained, and then even though I was new on the ship, I worked with one of the senior guys too. We usually worked in pairs, and which is kind of customary in the electrical trade, because when I got home, I got into the electrical apprenticeship, and I was a union electrician all my work life. And when you work high voltage, you always work, that's the voltages above 480 volts. You always work two people in case something blows up in your face or you get electrocuted, the other person can pull you away.
Okay.
And so I always worked with a man that was familiar with the circuitry. And then we had blueprints, tons of blueprints we had to follow. And the fellows that were on the ship, the catapult and elevator electricians that were seasoned guys, they pretty well knew where most of that stuff was.
Right. Was it complex work working on the catapults and elevators?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
Very complex.
What was the most common kind of problem that you had to fix?
Let's see. We had a lot of maintenance. I can remember we had sometimes when they didn't work, we had limit switches that were just, they would wear out or just wouldn't, the contacts wouldn't make. And so, and then we had these huge controllers, because we had direct current and AC current on the ship, and the newer ships are all AC, alternating current. But direct current, when the controllers, when a motor would start, they would slam the, they had the controllers or starters that would start the DC motors, and boy, they draw a lot of arc, a lot of current. So they would, the contacts in the motor starters would wear out real, they didn't last too long. And
right.
So we had to repair them, replace them.
Right. What is you're sending a lot of the jets, the F-4s. What other kind of aircraft did the Enterprise carry with it?
Okay, we had we only had one. We had a Vigilante, which it was just a sleek, real sleek aircraft that only it had a bomb cavity, and that was in case we had to put our nuclear bomb in there. And it would literally just, it would fit in the cavity, and then these things were super fast. They'd go faster than the speed of sound, and then if they were going to drop the bomb, they just go straight up, and then the bomb would just slide out. And we had one of those, and then we had some helicopters. We had A6 Skyhawks, which were a one-passenger, one-pilot aircraft. Then we had A6 Intruders, and they used the A6 Intruders. They were a two-pilot aircraft. The pilots sat side by side on those, where on the F-4 Phantoms they sat behind, one in front of the other. And the A6s, the Intruders, and the F-4 Phantoms were the ones that we used mostly to drop our bombs over in Vietnam.
Yeah. Was it, I imagine there were times when some of those pilots didn't come back, or you lost a plane?
Yeah, there were, and a lot of times when they'd launch an aircraft, the cat was only about 400 foot long, so they would take and they would behind the aircraft they had jet blast deflectors. It's just probably about a 10-foot high thing, piece of iron that would raise up, and so when they were ready to launch an aircraft, they would take and raise the jet blast deflectors up and then give it full power and just thunderous roar. And then they have air bosses on the flight deck, and he'd just give the signal and they'd release it and they'd launch them. And sometimes the aircraft would malfunction and it'd just go right, after a little ways, after it was launched, it'd just go right into the ocean.
Wow.
And I don't remember, I think on our cruise when I was over there, I don't think we had one that happened on, where we lost an aircraft.
Did you have any that went down because of enemy fire?
We did, and I, that was so long ago. I just can't remember how many planes we lost.
Yeah. What was the move? So when the captain would come on, would you ever know about losses like that? Did the whole crew know when you lost one or something like that?
They would. Yeah, they'd announce it over the public address system.
What was that like? I mean, how was that news received? If you're one of the crew members.
Well, you're pretty sad.
Yeah.
You lost one of your shipmates.
Yep.
Pretty depressing, because that was such a political war anyway. I don't know. It was really sad. And then they would bring a lot of the people that got killed in Vietnam aboard the ship, and they had these big coolers they would put them in, and then they'd ship them back to the States.
So were there transport planes too coming and going off the Enterprise as well, or how did that work?
Yeah, they were smaller. They were the Cod mail planes were probably the largest, and they would hold a body or two.
Okay.
Is how they.
Yeah, that probably brought the reality of war, I imagine, home, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. What's the were you ever? I mean, the Enterprise, I imagine, was pretty heavily guarded. Were you ever under a threat of attack or anything like that, or were you always far enough out of the reach of the enemy?
Well, we were. In fact, I can remember one time pretty vividly when in the Navy, when you're aboard ship, battle alert is called general quarters. And they come over the PA system, general quarters, all hands man your battle stations. And I can remember as an electrician, my battle station was number 3 aircraft elevator machinery room. And we were on what they called sound-powered phones with everybody, other electricians in their locations, and we were online with them, and then I don't know who else, probably the executive officer too, but when you were at general quarters, you were in contact with a lot of people.
Yeah, was that scary when that happened?
Yeah, it was. What we had is 2 MiGs come after us. And so they went to general quarters, and then right away they launched 2 F-4 Phantoms with heat-seeking Sidewinder missiles, and that was a phenomenal piece of battle equipment. They'd get behind the MiGs, and they could be quite a ways away, and they'd shoot these missiles in their direction, and because they were heat-seeking, when they got close to the aircraft, they would just literally go right up the afterburner and blow the ship apart, or I mean the airplane apart.
Yeah.
phenomenal piece of
Yeah.
equipment.
Yeah. So when you were on general quarters, what did you do? Like, did you just man a machine, or I mean, so what's your job? Okay, you're there. What do you do?
Well, you had your tools with you. You always had a bag of tools in case something broke down, and then you were in contact with other members of the of my shop, and you were just down there in case something happened. Didn't really do anything. You just had these headphones that fit on your head, and you were just in contact with quite a few people.
Yeah, yeah. What when you're over there, do you get the sense? I mean, even though you're not on land in Vietnam, you're watching all of these planes constantly take off, go, run missions. What you have a sense of? I imagine you have a sense that this is war, right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, it's probably not the same as if you're on land, but I imagine that. So. What's the camaraderie like with the people you work around? What's the general mood of the ship?
Well, you're pretty depressed because you're out there for at least 30 days a time before you get to pull in to the Philippines, and then it was party time for a week.
Yeah.
But it was pretty depressing. In fact, I can remember before, when I was a mess cook still, I was in the scullery. And what the scullery is where they bring your dirty dishes, and you scrape the food off and rinse them off, and then put them in the steam cleaner thing to clean them. And I can remember this. I was probably at that time 20 years old, 21 maybe, and of course you miss home. And I can remember I wrote a lot of letters, and it was all free, didn't it?
Right.
And I sent a lot of pictures of the ship home because they had at the public affairs office on ship, you get all the pictures you wanted of the Enterprise. But I can remember one time we were working in the scullery, and this guy, I'm not a fighter. I've never been a fighter or a troublemaker, but the tensions kind of run high, and so this one guy, he said something, and so we decided we were going to duke it out, but we couldn't. But they'd court-martial if they caught you fighting, so they have what they call sponsons on the side of the ship. And a sponson is kind of an area, there's a hatch door you can go out on this thing, and they would store stuff there, and they weren't a very big area. They're probably about the size of the room we're in, which is probably about, looks like it's about 20 by 30, and it was actually stupid. I can remember this guy. He went out in front of me, and then as I went out, he nailed me as I walked out through the hatchway, and so we were scrambling around and slugging each other and stuff, and then I'm not a fighter, but I managed to be on top of him. He's a guy about my size. And I said, "What are we doing this for? This is retarded." He said, "You're right." But we were just wired, tensions were just high. And
yeah, you're in close quarters.
in close quarters all the time. And what's really dangerous about doing something like that is the ship is constantly moving. If one of us would have fallen off, they'd have never known we were gone unless, somebody, if we both fell off, we'd been in trouble. They would have known, but if one guy would have fallen off, then you'd obviously would have told somebody, and they'd have probably sent a helicopter with lights after you. But it's pretty spooky out in the middle of the ocean at night. There's nothing there.
Yeah, that's for sure. So what about tell me a little bit about, you said you wrote a lot of letters home, you sent a lot. What was the communication? This is in the days before cell phones or FaceTime or Skype. What did you tell home, and what kind of communication did you get back?
Well, I told people that I missed home, and I missed my family and missed the cars. I just missed everyday things that you didn't have.
Yeah.
And then a lot of us guys, it was kind of a general practice. If you had a a sister, then your buddies, they'd want to write her. and just on a friendship basis. In fact, I can remember writing a girl in Massachusetts, one of my buddies. And in fact, I was just back there here about a month ago to the reunion of my ship. We were north of Hartford at Windsor Locks, and he now lives in Maine, and he drove all the way down to see me. We spent about 7 or 8 hours together about a month ago, and I never did meet his sister, but I can remember writing to her quite a bit.
Yeah, what did you miss most about home?
What do I miss most?
What did you miss most about home when you were over?
Well, I'm a car guy, so I missed my cars.
Yeah.
And of course, I was never real close to my parents, but I missed them, and then missed my brother and sisters, and my friends.
Yeah.
And one thing I did, I can remember, that was a lot of guys would have girlfriends, and when they went in the service, they'd get Dear John letters. Their girlfriends would just break up with them. So I went with a couple girls when I was in college, but it just so happened that I wasn't going with anybody at the time I went on my active duty.
Right.
And that's for the better.
Yeah. You think so?
Yeah, I really do.
Yeah.
Because then you don't have your girlfriend to worry about at home, or you're never concerned whether she's going to dump you or be going out on you or whatever.
Yeah, that was I've heard some pretty sad Dear John stories in this. Yeah. Were you did you ever think at any time you might not make it back?
Well, yeah, I did when those MiGs come up after us. We went to general quarters. Oh boy, this could be it.
Right.
And because if they bomb the ship, you don't know what happened. The ship actually did have some explosions on it about 2 months after I got off of it.
Yeah, the Enterprise, yeah.
Enterprise blew up and killed, I think it was 26 people.
Mm-hmm.
And what they had is when we hit Alameda, I should back up a little bit. When we hit Alameda, we had what we called a dependence cruise, because a lot of the guys' wives and families were in the area, San Francisco, Alameda, Oakland. So what they did is they took everybody's cars and their families and put them on the ship, and we went north to Bremerton to go into dry dock. And that was something. That probably took 2 or 3 days to sail up there, but that was really something. And of course, we had good food to eat then,
Right, because
the guys' families, and so the food was pretty good. And then we went into a dry docks in Bremerton, and what that is they have these locks, excuse me, concrete. Big holding pins, and they tow the ship in there, and they have certain, of course, they have all the different big huge concrete blocks that the ship sets on. So they float the ship in there, and they have the blocks already positioned. And so what they do is get the ship where they want it, and then they pump the water out, and then it just slowly sets down on these blocks. And then they call them yard birds, or the people that work in the yards. Then they do their jobs, whatever they have to do. And it sticks in my mind. I got out. Then the military does some stupid things. They had too many reservists on active duty. Here they're begging for people, and then on the other side of their mouth they're saying, well, we got too many reserves. And you could always stay, but they offered you early out off of your active duty. And of course, they offered me the early out when we pulled into Bremerton, and I think I got about 5 or 6 months off of my 2 years active. That I just had to drill, of course, when I got home. But the way the military has changed a lot since I was on active duty, but you'd get a lot of retarded people. Well, I called them retarded people, and a lot of people from the deep south, Louisiana, Arkansas, and they'd always badger me because I was from Montana, and you know, and they always say, well, you have intercourse with sheep. So you're crazy. We don't do that. But you know, they'd always, because I was from Montana, I was labeled that way, and I used to have just a nasty, it would just make just really tick me off when they do that. They'd badger me about stupid stuff because I don't like retarded things. Don't talk retarded to me. Talk civil.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I'd had kind of a belly full of a lot of people that I had to work with on the ship, and it was just time to go home. And so I thought, yeah, they're going to let me out, you bet. And so I got out, I think, around Thanksgiving of '68. So the ship was in a short dry dock period. I think it was probably about 3 months. So then, the story I'm getting around to is after they did the repair work to the Enterprise, then they were testing it out off the coast of Hawaii. And this would have been in January of '69. So what they did is they were off the coast of Hawaii on what they call sea trials. They were checking the repaired stuff out and made sure everything functioned normally, and launching airplanes and recovering aircraft. And to start a lot of the airplanes, they had these little carts. They were a little vehicle, kind of like a Jeep, with a small jet engine on it that provided starting current and air to get the turbines going. They'd put this little jet engine. They had a kind of a heavy-duty big hose, and they'd hook onto the aircraft, and they'd start spinning the turbines on the aircraft, on the F-4s and the A-6s. Well, these little carts about the size of a Jeep with this small jet engine on it, the exhaust was horribly hot, and they had practice bombs on the aircraft on the flight deck. And what happened is somebody wasn't paying attention and got one of those starter carts too close to one of the aircraft that had a bomb, a live bomb on it, and it set the bomb off. And then they had a chain reaction of explosions and killed a whole bunch of people. And I have a good friend that was in my shop who I stay in contact with. He lives in Tucson, and he was on there when the ship blew up.
Yeah. In fact, we've covered that a little bit here. In fact, the guy who went missing, the MIA, Alan Ashall from Billings, had friends on the Enterprise because he had been on the Enterprise as an F4 pilot, and that had really rocked him. That was right before he went down, and a lot of people who, it's a small circle of people who kind of were on these aircraft carriers. Even though they carried thousands, it was still a small number who were on here and or flew, and kind of, you knew people. You got to know them when you're out there. Most
definitely. A full crew is 5,800 men.
Wow.
And that's with what they call squadrons. We had different squadrons. Like the A6s were a different squadron. The F4s, the A4 Skyhawks, the one-man little fighters. They were all called squadrons, and they had their own people, their own mechanics, their own pilots, and they would come and go off the ship when they were through with their tour.
Right.
But so you basically knew them.
So you were glad to get out of the service.
Yeah, off my active duty.
Yeah. And so what happened what was your reception like when you got out of the service, and what'd you go and do?
Well, see, when I got off my active duty, of course, I had to drill at the Reserve Center 1 weekend a month.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of guys, well, your own age, that have just come back off of their active duty and stuff. And it was actually pretty boring being a shipboard electrician at the Reserve Center, because they had different classes they had you do, and it was just pretty boring. And you'd sit into a room for hours, and then you'd take a break, and a lot of times there's just nothing to do. Until I went into the Seabees.
Okay, tell me how you got into the Seabees.
Okay, I was a shipboard electrician. I went, excuse me, through 2 tours, 2 6-year hitches, almost through the second 6-year hitch. And this Lieutenant Kirby from Big Timber, he was a realtor. I guess he's still up there, but he said, we couldn't find you guys. Me and a couple other guys, we just left the Reserve Center and told different people we were going to go have a cup of coffee, excuse me, and donut. So we, excuse me, when we got back, Kirby said, where were you guys? Well, coffee and a donut. He says, well, I'm going to dock your pay all day. I said, no, you're not. I'm just quitting. That time you could quit drilling. I was still attached. I was still attached to the Navy, but since I was in my second 6-year hitch, I didn't have to. I could just quit drilling. So I quit drilling, and at that time I was a union electrician.
Okay, so you didn't have to drill on your second tour, right?
Well, you had to drill, but you could quit.
Okay.
See, but I couldn't quit my first 6-year tour in the reserves. I had to fulfill, do the 2 years active duty, or in my case, they give us an early out off the active duty. But I still had to drill. That was mandatory.
Okay.
And a lot of guys quit after their first hitch. They just quit. My buddy Jack, that got me talked into joining, he only did 1 6-year hitch. His 2 years active and 4 years inactive, and he just quit, got out of the Navy. Not me, though. When I reached the end of my first year hitch, I thought, wow, I kind of missed it, you know.
Really?
Yeah, I missed it, so I just signed up again. And of course, as you get a little bit older, and there was nothing. I should say there wasn't anything, but a lot of times there wasn't much to do down there, and it was pretty boring. And so we're kind of, and since I was a construction worker, anyhow, I was a union electrician. I probably a little braver than most people, and I'd say, yeah, let's go get a cup of coffee. You know, heck with them.
Right.
Not a good attitude, but anyway. So the lieutenant, he was going to dock our pay all weekend, and I said, no, you're not. So I was out probably it sticks in my mind, about 3.5 years. And I had a lot of friends. They had a Seabee unit, and the Seabees are the construction part of the Navy. So they had us fleet sailors plus the Seabees at the Reserve Center down at North Park on the corner of 8th and 22nd, I think it was. It's gone now. They tore it down. So I run into one of my buddies. He actually worked for the city of Billings. His name was Frank Linknecht. And so he said, hey, Braun, he said, you ought to come back in the Seabees. And I said, you know, good idea. And I did that. I was a second class electrician's mate when I quit, or an E5. And so then I went down and talked to the recruiter, and a nice man named Dwayne Dittmer. He's still around town. And I said, I'd like to come in the Seabees as a construction electrician. And he said, well, I can get you in as a third class or E4, but not as an E5, what you quit as. So I said, well, I hate to do that. but he said, I can get you in as an equipment operator. And that's what my rate is here. It's a bulldozer. And so I came in the Seabees as an E5 and loved the Seabees because it was construction, what I was familiar with. And so I was still attached to the Navy. I never totally got out, so my time just kind of went on.
Right.
And I have what they call, these are called hash marks. It's for 4 years service, each mark, and there's 7 of them, because I was actually attached to the Navy for over 28 years.
Wow.
Even though I only got credit for 24. But I wear the 7 hash marks. And if you were just if you had got into a little trouble or average sailor, they were red. Everything was red. But if you were a good boy, didn't get into any serious trouble, you get to wear gold.
Right.
Yeah.
So 20. That's a long time. So the military life, it appears, kind of agrees with you. I mean, you enjoy it.
I enjoy it, and I've got a motto, something I've always said: America, love it or leave it. Get the hell out of here. You know, I firmly believe that every American male, if you're physically qualified, you should do something, even for a short time, for your country in the service. That's my own belief. A lot of people don't think that way.
Right. What's your when you got home? Were people did people treat you differently because you'd been through Vietnam? Was it different treatment than what you had expected?
Actually, people, because I was basically from Columbus, people welcomed you. They were proud of you.
Yeah.
I know in Norfolk, Virginia, we heard stories about they had signs up that people around town, their yards, dogs and sailors keep off the grass. And then when we pulled back into San Francisco or Alameda, I heard of course, the Haight-Ashbury movement was strong at that period of time. And so the flower children and all this, and you were baby killers and all that. But I never directly was approached by anybody.
Okay.
In California.
Yeah. Was it because you were an electrician in the Navy? Was coming back to becoming an electrician, was that a pretty easy transition for you to make?
Well, it was, but it kind of happened by accident.
Okay. Why? How'd that happen?
Well, what happened is I was drilling on a weekend drill, and one of the guys I was drilling with says, he said, you ought to get, and he was an electrician. He got into the apprenticeship. He says, since you're already an electrician, the basic schooling is similar. It's almost the same. You ought to get into the electrical trade. And so I said, good idea. So I applied with the local union down here, and I got signed up as an apprentice, and which has been a good living, and I've learned a lot during my work life.
Yeah. What was your happiest memory that you have, either of Vietnam or in the service? There are good memories though too, I imagine, of being on the Enterprise.
I'm trying to think. I remember when I getting out after being badgered by a handful of guys. Not everybody acts dumb, but there's always a handful of guys that would badger me about being from Montana. But I guess you're talking about being a joyful...
Yeah, or happy. Were there good times being in the Navy?
Well, there were. Like when we'd pull into Seabee Bay to get replenished food, they had a there was a little island called Grandy Island, which is from where we pulled in with the Enterprise, maybe 2 miles away, and they would have motor launches, small boats, taking people over to this Grandy Island. It was a R&R, rest and relaxation island, and or you could go into town. I don't know. The venereal disease rate was so high over there. I didn't want to get involved with any women over there, and so I would go over to Grandy Island a lot, and it was pretty cool. The government would hire, they would hire Philippine gals to dance with you at the club, and I can remember you could drink mixed drinks were $0.25. And I used to like Singapore slings.
What's in a Singapore sling?
I think it's rum and I think it's rum and some kind of fruit juice.
Right.
And it was
pretty good. That sounds pretty good.
It was good, yeah. And they were only $0.25. And
right.
And of course I've never been one to go out and get totally stone drunk, plastered. I just don't do that. And it was kind of cool. I remember over at Grandy Island, they had the Filipino gals just lined up, and you could go ask them. Of course, they had a live band there, and cheap drinks, and so you could go ask the gals to dance. And I can remember there were older gals and then young, pretty cute gals, and some of the guys would go ask the young gals to dance with them, and they were a little snotty to them, and of course you couldn't arrange for any. I mean, that was part of the rules. You couldn't arrange to meet them afterwards. I mean, They were just there to dance with you, and then a lot of the guys would dance with the older women, and they were more fun.
Really?
Yeah, they were just more fun, and they didn't act snobby to you and everything.
Right.
And I can remember a lot of the Clark's Air Force Base is real close there, and the Air Force guys, they'd treat the Filipino gals a lot better than some of the sailors were kind of slobs.
Yeah.
They treated the gals, and not all of them, but some of them, and some of the Air Force guys, they'd buy their girls fancy rings and jewelry and stuff like that.
Right.
But that was fun, and I enjoyed that. And then we had the division. I was in what they call E Division, which covered electricians and ship fitters and different other rates. And we would have parties on the beach at Grandy Island, because it was just literally a tropical paradise. And we always had an abundance of steaks. They would get 2 or 3 cases of steaks, and our division would have a steak fry, and it was good. And then booze, all the beer you could drink and stuff.
Wow, that sounds good. So tell me, as a Vietnam vet, a guy who was over there, what do you looking back on it for it's been almost 50 years on that war. What do you think about it now? Has your view of it changed?
No, I thought it was a political war, and uncalled for. It could have been avoided. And I think it was just a huge, and it was a huge waste of human lives. And then you get politicians like Kerry. He was over there, but his daddy made sure that he wasn't anywhere near real danger. So
right.
But war is just horrible, and I think many people take our cozy way of life way for granted, and people, however, come to realize how important the military is and how nice we've got it on 9/11. I have never been thanked so much in my life for my service as I have for, thanks for being in the military. And I'm pretty proud. I have a military ID, which I have with me. But I'm extremely proud of that, and I show it off to people. And what that means is I can go on any military base in the world, any U.S. military base, and that's it right there. And you had to get that military ID. You, of course, obviously have to be in the military and have to have been on active duty for a minimum of 20 years. I mean, attached to the military, reserve or active, for 20 years. And I was, as an E6, all they would let me go was, stay in was, as an E6, 24 years. Even though I had 28 years time-wise, 24 years with all the points for every year was all I could have. I don't know, I'm just proud of my country, and I'm proud to wear my uniform. Driving down here this morning, I just felt good.
Yeah.
I felt good because I think this is just a wonderful thing the Gazette's doing to recognize the veterans, and I just felt good. It feels good to get my uniform on, and I wear my uniform regularly because I belong to the Columbus Post, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And so we have a lot of veterans have us do services at their a lot of veterans' families have the VFW do military rights services, and so I'm not organized enough to have my VFW, the black slacks and the white shirt, so I just wear my uniform.
Yeah, you still fit into your uniform, by the way, too.
Yeah, and it feels good.
Yeah. It's let's talk a little bit about what do you hope people, one of the reasons the Gazette is doing this, Doug, is because we want to make sure that in the future, when people go back and want to learn about what Vietnam was, whether you were on a ship or whether you're on land or whatever you were doing, people can get an idea of what it was like. What do you hope people remember about the Vietnam War from a guy who helped serve in that?
Well, I hope they remember that it was a bad war that I feel it could have been avoided, and we lost so many thousands and thousands of young men. That's just sickening. Mm-hmm. In our last skirmishes or wars, with Iraq and Afghanistan, all that, we've lost people, but nothing like in Vietnam. I think it was like over 60,000 lives, young men that we've lost, and I just hope people realize that war's not good, and and we really need to be thankful and not take our liberties for granted.
Yeah,
I can give a little example here. I use my military ID a lot to stay on bases, and Great Falls, we have a base there, so I've stayed up there quite a bit, and Rapid City, South Dakota, at Ellsworth. And Ellsworth Air Force Base, they got a hold of the people in northwest, a lot of people in northwest or northeast Wyoming, southeast Montana, and the Rapid City area, because they have to practice, they have to train. So I think it was 4 years ago, they had a seminar put on at the Hilton Garden Inn over by Costco, and they wanted people's input. So I have a Air Force PT shirt. It's got the Air Force logo on it, on the back, and then it says U.S. Air Force on it. So I wore my Air Force shirt, and there were 33 of us people scheduled to speak, And of all of speak for or against whether the Air Force should expand their bombing mission or their practice mission, which not bombing, but they're just their low-level altitude flights and stuff like that. And I happen to own a ranch over by north of Red Lodge, and I'm right in the path of the Ellsworth. When they fly out of Ellsworth to McChord in Seattle, McChord Air Force Base, and sometimes they're low, and it kind of startles you. I mean, all of a sudden, here's this B-1 or B-52 bomber, fairly low, but I haven't seen any repercussions with the cattle or anything because of it. I mean, they just have to train. So this meeting they had in Billings was to get the vote, get people's approval per se, or let them know why they wanted that to expand that practice area. And there were, of the 33 people, there were only 3 of us that were in favor of the Air Force. And I said, and that was about the time I was in Spokane, and I picked up a paper, and that was about the time one of these Muslim extremists said, there's an article in the newspaper about there's a bombing back in New York City, and he was bragging how he tried to blow up something in New York City, but he got caught, and he says, we will bury you. And I took that newspaper with me, and I held up. I said, this is why. And I told him a little about the article. And I said, this is why our military needs to practice right here. And I said, everybody, not everybody, but most people take our nice way of life, all of our freedoms for granted, grossly. And they don't realize how important the military is. And I said the Air Force definitely needs an okay for this. And of course, I heard people say, oh, we have small pilots of aircraft. We'll have to work around their schedule and this and that. And that's all bunk, because they were only going to do it on certain times. And I can't remember what, it was several days a month or whatever, or several days every 2 or 3 months. But it was just, it really upset me that people thought, here they're living in our country, and then they're whining about the Air Force needing to practice. And so I just, I only had 2 minutes to speak, but I give them an earful in 2 minutes.
I bet you did. So tell me, when you, we've covered a lot of ground, but I also want to know, when you look back over a career that's that long, have we missed anything when we've been talking? I mean, I'm sure we've missed a lot, but what are there important things that you and I have missed here in this conversation about your service or about your time in the military?
I think we've covered quite a bit. I have a tendency to talk a lot, but I've literally been all over the world, and I do have a lot to talk about, and so I think that we've covered about everything. I just feel it's so important that we don't take our freedoms for granted, like a lot of people appear to do. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. And I'm really patriotic and really firm in my beliefs. America, love it or leave it. Love our country or get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
I think that's real important, because there's other places you can go. I can remember one time we pulled into Hong Kong. The Enterprise pulled into Hong Kong, China. And so we were there, I think, about a week. And I can remember we had a launch. We were anchored out in the harbor, and we had a launch for security. We had one ship going around one end of the ship as the other one was going around the front all the time, constantly, 24 hours a day for security. And there's part of Hong Kong, there's a little town close to it called Kowloon, and that was on the communist mainland, and how this other guy, of course we had to wear our uniforms when we were on liberty over there, and I could remember this other guy and we had our uniforms on, and somehow we strayed over into Kowloon, because there's no boundaries per se. Kowloon is like just, it's all kind of Hong Kong, but this part of Hong Kong that's on the communist mainland. And I remember we went into this department store and we'd have these people just kind of glaring at us. And then we went into this department store, and at that time the big communist leader was Mao Zedong. And I can remember they had a big statue of Mao in there. So I told my buddy, I think we better get out of here. And then they just had a communist rally, and there were pamphlets all over on the streets and everything. And I felt really uneasy. And we got out of there.
Pretty quick.
Yeah. And it's times like that that you appreciate your freedoms.
Yeah, yeah. That's well said. Did you ever make it, or have you ever been back to Vietnam?
I haven't. No.
Do you have any desire?
I really have no desire to go back there. There are a lot of veterans that have. My brother-in-law in Columbus, he was in the Marines over there, but he was a mechanic, so he never actually got out and got into battle. He just worked on military vehicles. But so many of our people were inland, and I think a lot of them that were inland quite a bit want to see how much it's changed. I know the problem of people that were inland is Agent Orange. And a good friend of mine, our former mayor, Chuck Tooley, good friend of mine, he had a bout with cancer, and they didn't get it all. This is 4, 5, 6 years ago. And so as I was leaving to go to my ship's reunion in September, I called Chuck and talked to him. He said, Doug, I got to go in for prostate cancer the 5th of October. And so as soon as I got back from Connecticut, I called him, and he said, Doug, it's good news. He said, they got all the cancer. The bad news is I'm in pain. I said, oh, you're a big boy. You'll get over that, Chuck.
Right.
He said, oh, yeah. But what I'm trying to impress on is that so many of our guys have got cancer from Agent Orange, and Chuck is one of them. And then another guy from Columbus, he had kind of a weird attitude. His dad had a lot of land and stuff around Columbus, and of course he says, I'm going to go in and get my 2 years over with and get out. Well, he was a gunner on a Huey. And of course, they were always going in and rescuing people, and he was in the middle of Agent Orange all the time, and he's got cancer.
Yeah.
And we've had people in Columbus, veterans we've had services for within the last 3 or 4 years that have been Agent Orange victims.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you been back to the Vietnam Wall?
I haven't. That's one thing I've got to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that is that something that you want to do that?
I do want to do it. It just kind of hasn't been in my travel path. Like when I went to Connecticut last month for the ship's reunion, I would have had to go south a ways, and so I had to get back. I have rental property in town here, and so I just had to get back. And we were gone too long. We were gone about a month.
Yeah. So did you, So you've seen a lot of the world though too because of your service in the military as well. So
most definitely.
yeah. When people learn that you served in the military, are they do they continue to thank you today when they see you in your uniform?
They do. In fact, we were in Connecticut in latter September. We were at this place, huge kind of exposition park. That was part of our tour, and they had some kind of like a big carnival going on. And so they had this one place. They were serving beer, pretty expensive. So I said, "Hey, do you give a military discount?" I showed them my ID, and so she said, "Well, no." I said, "Well, that's I said, I don't like that because that's pretty important to me that I am a veteran." But anyway, then I ran into a city cop. Actually, this was just up in Massachusetts, and so I told him I was, we were here for the ship's reunion and stuff, and I said I showed this gal my military ID, and she just kind of blew me off, a young gal, and so this young man, he heard me. He was sitting at this table next to me, and he said, "Well, thank you so much for your service," and he shook my hand, and that makes you feel so good when people do that.
Yeah.
It's just phenomenal, and when I'm in uniform, our post on Memorial Day, our sister post is Absarki and Reed Point, and we usually have services at those two places, plus our Columbus memorial service. But I know there's a lady at the little Dewdrop Inn in Absarki, and every year after our memorial service, I usually stop in and get a milkshake or something there, and she seeing me in uniform just brings tears to her eyes, because her father was a Navy veteran, and he's obviously dead, and it just means so much to her. It just, I don't know, it brings a lot of, wearing my uniform brings a lot of happiness to people, old veterans, and people that can associate the Navy with their family.
Yeah.
So it's all been very positive.
When you go to those reunions, what do you talk about? What do you see? What goes on there?
What we do is, of course, the chance of meeting somebody that you were on the ship with is pretty slim at the same time. And what's kind of, people are different. Like there's a man from Columbus who's kind of a wheel in the VFW, and that's his thing. We were on the ship together in '68. Two guys from the same town on the ship together. Crazy. I mean, it's just phenomenal. But
did you know each other when you were on the ship?
Oh yeah, yeah. And so, in fact, I told him when I discovered that the Enterprise had reunions. The first one I went to was in '97 in Reno, and I told him, said, "Hey Rick, Enterprise is having a reunion," and so he said, "Yeah, I'll have to go to that." So he did, and that's the only one he's ever been to. But it's just like, I don't know, it wasn't. I don't know. He was on it for 4 years, so I don't know why. Maybe he got soured because of the length of time he was on it. And then another buddy of mine in Tucson, he went to the same reunion same year, and so he goes to quite a few of them. But his wife has health issues, so he hasn't been to a couple of them.
Right.
But you just you bond with people. You make new friends.
Yeah, because you've all had that as a common experience.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say two things to you. Thank you for serving. Thank you for doing what you did, and thank you for all that time. I mean, 1965 to 1993, that's a long time, and so I appreciate that. we should all be grateful for your service. And the other thing I wanted to say is thank you for, I appreciate all the nice things you said about this series, but it's really been my honor. And I also want to say thank you for sharing your story. We couldn't do these series without veterans like you saying you're willing to talk about it. So I want to thank you as well, Doug, for your participation today.
Well, and I really appreciate that, Daryl. It means a lot to me.
It means a lot that you're here. This has been Daryl Ehrlich. I've been with Doug Braun. He was with the U.S. Navy from Pearl Harbor Day 1965 to January 1993. This has been Vietnam Voices with the Billings Gazette. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it.